Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I had just moved into a new apartment after landing my first big job out of college. It was a cramped little studio, but it was mine. The only furniture I had was a hand-me-down dresser from my grandma. It was big and clunky, not really my style, but it worked for the time being. After living there for a few months, I decided the old floral dresser had to go. I wanted to redecorate with some more modern pieces better suited to my taste. I snapped some photos of the dresser and created a listing online, pricing it to sell quickly. Within an hour, I had a message from an interested buyer named Tim. His message was short but polite. He asked if I could hold the dresser until a weekend when he could come pick it up. I said that was fine, and we arranged a time for him to stop by my apartment on Saturday morning. Right on schedule Saturday, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a man who looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s standing there. "Hi, are you Tim?" I asked. He nodded and shook my hand firmly. As we exchanged introductions, I noticed he avoided making eye contact. I figured maybe he was just shy. We walked over to the dresser and he looked it over closely, running his hands along the edges and inspecting every side. I pointed out a small scratch on the surface that I had noted in the listing. "No problem at all," Tim said quietly. He agreed to the price we had discussed online and pulled out his wallet to pay me in cash. The transaction was quick and smooth. Tim even helped me carry the heavy dresser down to his pickup truck parked outside. After he drove off with the dresser, I didn't think much more about Tim or the sale. I was just glad to have the extra space in my apartment. But later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message, the first of what would soon become an endless barrage. "Hi there. Tim here. Just wanted to say thanks again for the dresser. I absolutely love it. Let me know if you're selling anything else in the future." A polite enough message, if a little overeager. I replied with a quick "no problem, take care," thinking that would be the end of it. But the texts kept coming over the next few days. "Do you have the exact measurements for the dresser? I'm redoing my room and need to figure out furniture placements. What made you want to sell the dresser? Just curious about its history." I noticed some scratches on the back too. Any chance I could get a partial refund for that? At first I tried to politely respond, thinking he was just one of those overly enthusiastic buyers, but the questions kept getting more and more personal. "What do you do for work? I saw you said you just moved. Where from? What's your schedule like on weekdays? Maybe we can meet up for coffee sometime. Have you lived in the area long? We should hang out, I could show you around." Eventually I stopped responding altogether, but Tim just kept texting. He must have messaged me over 100 times in the span of a week. The tone of his messages started to change too, becoming more demanding. "Hello. Are you there? Why aren't you answering me? I'd really like to get to know you better. Please just tell me a little about yourself. If you don't respond soon, I'll have to find out more about you myself." Seeing that last message, a chill ran down my spine. This was more than just friendly persistence. It felt sinister and threatening. I immediately blocked Tim's number, hoping that would be the end of it. But over the next few days, other strange things started happening. I came home one day to find a bouquet of flowers at my door with no note. On another day, a pizza arrived that I hadn't ordered. Then late one night, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, but there was only silence on the other end, accompanied by faint, heavy breathing. The calls continued to come in at all hours, and I'd quickly hang up in a panic each time. Things escalated when I arrived home from work one day to find a note taped to my front door. In sloppy handwriting it read, "I need to see you again. Please call me back. I know you're home." Attached was a torn piece of paper with a map of my neighborhood, with an X marked on the exact location of my building. I froze in fear, crumpling the note in my hand. Tim had clearly been staking out my apartment to find where I lived. He knew my daily routine, my coming and goings. I could be under surveillance at that very moment. In a panic, I packed a bag and crashed at a friend's place for several nights, not daring to return home. I filed a police report, but they said there was little they could do without evidence of a direct crime. Over a month later, I finally started to breathe easier. The strange calls and messages had ceased completely. I moved into a new apartment in a different part of town, taking extra precautions to keep my identity private. I tried my best to move on from the terrifying ordeal. But I still feel paranoid leaving my home or when I'm out running errands. There's a lingering unease, a sense that Tim could be lurking around any corner, looking for his next opening to contact me. Just one seemingly normal transaction led to weeks of torment. It's a constant reminder to be cautious meeting strangers online. You truly never know a person's intentions until it's too late. I never imagined that selling an old laptop on Facebook Marketplace could lead to the utter destruction of my identity and financial ruin. It was an innocent transaction that quickly spiraled into a nightmare from which I'm still struggling to awake. The laptop itself was nothing special, a 5-year-old Dell Inspiron that I had mainly used for working from home, surfing the web, and watching Netflix. It was functional but basic, with a few scratches on the lid and a battery that no longer held much of a charge. When I finally upgraded to a newer MacBook model, I decided to try and sell the Dell and recover some of its value. I took a few quick photos showing it powered on and posted it for sale on Marketplace, asking $200 based on prices for similar used models. Within a day, I had an interested buyer named Eric who offered me the full asking price. We exchanged a few messages. He said he needed an inexpensive laptop for basic personal use. I assured him this model would fit the bill. We arranged to meet that evening around 7 p.m. at a Starbucks near my apartment. I finished up some work emails, packed up the Dell and its aging charger in an old laptop bag, and headed to meet Eric. When I arrived, he was already waiting outside, a 30-something guy with short brown hair, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie. We exchanged brief pleasantries about the warm weather before I handed over the laptop. He powered it on quickly to verify it worked, then passed me 2 crisp $100 bills. I thanked him, said I hoped he would get good use out of it, and we parted ways amicably. As I pocketed the cash, I felt good about putting the old device to new use rather than letting it gather more dust in a closet. If only I had known then the terror that was to come. The first signs of trouble came about 3 weeks later. I was reviewing my credit card statement and noticed several unfamiliar charges. A $500 purchase at an electronics retailer, a $300 charge from a furniture store, and a $600 payment to an unfamiliar debt collection agency. Immediately, I called the card companies, insisting the charges were fraudulent. Over the next few days, the mystery charges kept coming: clothing stores, car repairs, catering services, even a $2,500 charge from a local jeweler. My credit card limits were being maxed out by someone making expensive purchases all around town. Despite my frantic disputes, the credit card companies conducted their investigations, but ultimately insisted the charges were legitimate and had been authorized with my PINs and security codes. I checked my credit report and saw that new accounts had been opened in my name, department store cards, personal loans, a lease on a high-end SUV. My once pristine credit score was plummeting by the day. I desperately tried to have the accounts closed and fraudulent balances erased, but I was trapped in bureaucratic mazes of every bank, lender, and credit bureau, endlessly repeating that I had no knowledge of any of these balances or accounts. But the damage intensified by the day. Soon I was contacted by aggressive collections agents demanding payment on large balances that had been racked up in my name. I explained over and over that I was a victim of identity theft, but they were unsympathetic, insisting I was still legally responsible for paying back the debts, regardless of the circumstances in which they were accrued. Each day brought new disasters. My email accounts were hacked, used to send convincingly urgent messages to my friends and family begging for money under the guise of an emergency or legal trouble I was in. My financial accounts were drained after someone called in pretending to be me and correctly answering security questions about my childhood street, mother's maiden name, and other personal details that only I should know. I spent untold hours on the phone desperately trying to contain the destruction, begging faceless and predatory bureaucracies to extend some understanding, but to no avail. Each institution assured me that according to their records, I initiated and was liable for every charge and new account. I felt violated and exposed, never knowing what new egregious charges or breach of privacy This malevolent identity thief would perpetrate next using my name and personal information. Months of sleepless, anxious nights passed in a blur. Every day brought new threats from collection agencies, notifications of services being disconnected for non-payment, and an ever-growing web of fraudulent accounts and balances accumulating under my name. My legal identity had been entirely usurped by a criminal who clearly had access to a frightening level of personal details needed to impersonate me flawlessly to banks, credit agencies, utilities, and anywhere else my information was stored. Finally, the obvious dawned on me. This identity theft and financial nightmare could all be traced back to that fateful marketplace transaction months earlier. The laptop I'd sold must have contained a treasure trove of my personal data and account information. Out of carelessness, I had sold away the keys to my identity and net worth by failing to properly wipe the Dell hard drive before letting it out of my possession. And now, all those sensitive details were in the hands of an unknown, malevolent villain who was systematically dismantling my life. They had all they needed: account numbers, passwords, PINs, security question answers, access to my email contacts, to manipulate the bureaucracies and systems against which I was completely powerless. I was overwhelmed trying to simultaneously halt the damage being done in my name while also scrambling to uncover who was behind this coordinated assault on my identity. Every day brought new violations I was unable to stop. I filed reports with the FTC and police, given the clearly criminal nature of the identity theft, but they had few useful leads to trace. The violated feelings sank deeper as it became clear I had enabled this faceless criminal to append everything. In desperation, I hired legal counsel and identity theft experts to try to reclaim my life. I wanted to send a message that I wouldn't be anybody's powerless victim, and the government wouldn't act. Many agonizing months later, after incalculable damage to my finances, reputation, and sense of security, I finally reached a place where the incidents tapered off. But I know the perpetrator remains in possession of my personal data, and the malice could reemerge again at any time. Hard lessons were learned from my careless marketplace transaction. My sense of security and trust in institutions have been irreparably shaken. I fear I may spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, feeling exposed and violated, convinced this chaotic nightmare could ramp up again someday if that laptop remains out there with my information unsecured inside it. I sold away my comfortable identity, and now must accept that malevolent forces obtained control that I may never fully regain. I was low on cash and got the idea to sell my old mountain bike on Marketplace to get some quick money. This bike was my baby. I had some great memories riding the local trails and taking it camping in the mountains. But jobs were scarce, so I decided to part ways with it and listed the bike online for $200. An interested buyer with the name Mike emailed me the next day asking if it was still for sale. We went back and forth figuring out a place to meet up. I suggested the grocery store parking lot downtown since it was public and I knew the area well. Mike agreed, and we set the meeting for 3 p.m. on Saturday. As the day approached, I started feeling nervous butterflies in my stomach. I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but suddenly all the warnings about getting robbed during online sales were running through my mind. But Mike had seemed nice enough over email, plus I really needed the cash. I decided to go through with it but take some precautions just in case. The morning of, I loaded up my bike and double-checked that my cell phone was charged and had reception. I made sure to fill up my gas tank too so I wouldn't have to stop before meeting Mike. The plan was to park close to the main entrance where there would be plenty of people around. For an extra precaution, I brought along my big maglite flashlight to keep in the car. I knew I was probably being paranoid, but better safe than sorry. I got to the parking lot 20 minutes early so I could scope out the scene. There were lots of cars and people outside the store, which made me feel better. I did a lap around the perimeter just to familiarize myself. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, I was feeling as ready as I could be. Right on time, a beat-up gray sedan pulled into the spot next to me. The scrawny white guy in a t-shirt and jeans got out. "Mike?" I asked. "Yup," he replied. He looked normal enough and eager to check out the bike. We exchanged a few pleasantries as I unlocked it from my roof rack. So far, so good. Mike asked if he could take it for a test ride, which I agreed to. He straddled the bike and did a couple laps around the parking lot. The kid looked barely old enough to drive, but he seemed comfortable on the bike. When he rolled back over to me, he said, "Yeah, man, this ride's great. I'll definitely take it. I felt the weight of relief wash over me. This was going perfectly. We opened up our trunks and I lifted the bike in. As I was leaning over, I suddenly felt a massive shove from behind and went sprawling hard onto the pavement. Dazed, I looked up to see Mike slamming down the trunk on my bike and jumping into the driver's seat. It dawned on me what was happening. I was getting robbed. Before I could even get to my feet, the engine roared and the sedan squealed out of the parking spot. "Stop!" I yelled in vain, giving chase on foot after the car. But Mike burned rubber and sped out of sight within seconds. My heart was pounding in my throat. I couldn't believe this had just happened in broad daylight surrounded by people. Mike had seemed totally harmless. Rage boiled up inside me. That was my bike. I needed that money. Swallowing back frustrated tears, I shakily took out my phone to call the police. The cops showed up 20 minutes later to take my statement and description of Mike and the car, but they didn't seem too convinced that they would ever track him down. Apparently, this parking lot was known for shady marketplace deals gone wrong. The officer scolded me pretty harshly about picking a safer location and bringing backup in the future. I drove home in a daze, replaying the robbery over and over. How Mike had thrown me off guard and expertly pulled off his escape. The sound of my trunk slamming over my beloved bike. My inability to stop him as he sped away, probably laughing at how easy I had made it for him. I felt like the world's biggest idiot. That bike meant so much to me, and I had handed it over for a measly $200 to some punk kid. Not to mention getting violently shoved onto the hard pavement in broad daylight surrounded by witnesses. And for what? All I had to show for it was sore shoulders, wounded pride, and empty pockets. Over the next few weeks, I scoured Facebook Marketplace and local sale pages to see if my bike would turn up. But of course, Mike wasn't dumb enough to try selling it in town. The police didn't turn up any leads either. My last bit of hope faded as I realized I'd never see that bike again, and I only had myself to blame. They say you live and learn. Well, getting robbed sure taught me a hard lesson about trust and vigilance with online sales. I'll never make the mistake again of agreeing to some remote public location with a stranger without backup. And I definitely won't let the need for quick cash override my personal safety and gut instincts. It cost me my beloved bike and dignity, but at least now I know better for next time. I just wish I didn't have to learn the hard way by me, Mike. I was so excited when I listed my grandmother's exquisite antique diamond tennis bracelet online. It was a precious family heirloom, dating back over 100 years, that had been passed down to me when my grandmother died last year. The tennis bracelet was handcrafted with over 20 glimmering round diamonds totaling 10 carats, set in an elegant platinum Art Deco design. I spent hours taking close-up high-resolution photos and videos to capture every angle and detail in the best possible light. In the listing description, I went into great depth about the bracelet's rich history and exceptional craftsmanship. I talked about how it was originally commissioned by my great-great-grandfather in 1912 for my great-great-grandmother's 25th birthday. Generations of women in our family have treasured it since then. I hope to find a buyer who would continue appreciating its heritage and timeless beauty, while also netting me a good price. Comparable antique jewelry was selling for around $5,000, which is what I optimistically listed it for. Within just a few hours, I received an eager inquiry from someone named Alex Smith. In well-written messages, Alex expressed deep fascination with the bracelet and confidence it was well worth the asking price. We went back and forth negotiating a bit, but ultimately settled on $5,000, which I was thrilled with. Alex seemed intent on buying it and asked if we could meet that very same day at a coffee shop downtown so I could hand over the bracelet and receive payment on the spot. I'll admit I was nervous about meeting a complete stranger to sell something so valuable and precious, but Alex repeatedly assured me that conducting the transaction in a public place would be safe for both of us. The straightforward messages from Alex's polished-looking profile allayed my initial hesitations, plus having cash in hand would allow me to pay off some pressing bills. Against my better judgment, I decided to go through with the meeting, but took some precautions like telling my roommate where I was headed, bringing my fully charged phone to record audio if needed, and packing pepper spray in my bag just in case. When I arrived outside the bustling coffee shop and saw Alex already seated at a table checking a watch impatiently, warning bells immediately started going off. Right away, I could tell the person did not match the profile picture at all. rather than the dapper-suited figure I expected. Alex was disheveled with greasy hair, worn clothes, and eyes darting around shiftily. Still, I reasoned looks could be deceiving and approached the meeting with an open mind, stashing my suspicions for the moment. Alex gave me a cold once-over before we exchanged tense pleasantries, and I pulled out the bracelet to prove I had it. But when I said I was ready to finally complete our agreed-upon exchange, things got scary fast. Alex refused to hand over any money, instead grabbing the bracelet roughly from my hands and scrutinizing it with a jeweler's loupe pulled from a pocket. After a few moments of inspection, Alex pronounced it a cheap fake worth no more than $20 flea market junk. I was so stunned I couldn't even speak at first, but when I found my voice, I tried explaining it was absolutely a genuine antique from my grandmother, pointing out the markings that verified as much. But Alex was having none of it, cutting me off and loudly insisting I was trying to scam an innocent buyer. Alex then demanded I immediately lower the price to just $500 or the deal was off, and Alex would just walk away, leaving me without a penny. When I stood firm that I would only sell it for our prearranged amount, Alex's mood shifted from contempt to full-blown hostility. Raising a voice and calling me a thief and swindler, Alex again threatened to walk away or even call the police and claim I was knowingly peddling phony merchandise. Alex continued loudly spewing accusations that I was some scam artist trying to take advantage of honest folks with my lies about a worthless fake bracelet. People around the coffee shop were starting to stare at the scene unfolding. I felt terrified, trapped, and unsure what to do next. I desperately wanted to grab the bracelet back and just get out of there. But with Alex tightly clutching the bracelet, refusing to let go, I was scared any effort to reclaim it might provoke Alex into violence or attempting to flee. I tried pleading with Alex to calm down so we could talk reasonably, but Alex seemed beyond reason at that point. With my heart pounding wildly, I knew I had to make a decision in that agonizing moment. I could give in to Alex's bullying threats, accept a lower price, and escape safely without the police being called. Or I could stand my ground knowing it meant walking away empty-handed, with Alex likely making good on those threats or worse. As I vacillated between fear and resolve, I could almost hear my grandmother's gentle voice telling me to have courage and not succumb to intimidation. Bolstered by her memory, I met Alex's menacing glare and stated firmly I refused to be bullied or cheated, so unless the original deal was honored, I would leave immediately with the bracelet in hand. Alex's eyes practically bored holes through me for long seconds as an internal struggle seemed to play out, but surrounded by so many witnesses, I think even Alex realized causing an even bigger, louder scene would only make things exponentially worse. With a final scowl of contempt, Alex shoved the bracelet back at me and stormed off shouting curses, knocking over a chair on the way out for good measure. I wasted no time hastily stuffing the bracelet in my bag and rushing out of the coffee shop too, my entire body shaking and flooded with adrenaline. In hindsight, I should have just called the police or store security at the first sign of Alex's belligerence and threats. But in the heat of the shocking moment, I felt bewildered and doubted myself, allowing the intimidation to push me to the brink of giving in. Though I emerged safely with both the bracelet and my dignity intact, the harrowing encounter left me rattled to the core. I learned the hard way that while the internet makes connecting with potential buyers seamless, it also comes with great risks when you don't know the true nature of who's behind that online facade. Next time I sell anything of value, I will only do so through reputable sites or services that can help ensure a fair, secure transaction. I'm still trembling internally thinking back on staring down the barrel of Alex's bulging enraged eyes and bared teeth. This was one marketplace horror story that ended well, but it's an experience I never hope to repeat. I'll be warning other sellers I know to take extreme precautions when exchanging valuables for cash. Because as I learned firsthand, greed can transform people into monsters who will try to manipulate and intimidate to get what they desire. But standing united against their predatory schemes can help stop such evil from prevailing. I should have known that deal on Facebook Marketplace was too good to be true. For months, I had been trying unsuccessfully to sell my antique grandfather clock on various sites and apps. The intricately carved oak wood with polished brass accents was stunning, but with the economy the way it was, people just weren't looking to spend a couple grand on something purely decorative. So when I got a message from an account with the name Stuff 2002 saying they were interested in buying it, I was admittedly a little overeager. The profile picture showed a friendly-looking middle-aged woman I'll call Nancy. Her warm smile and kind eyes made her seem trustworthy. Nancy and I exchanged several messages back and forth negotiating a price. I started at $2,500, but she counters offered $2,000, paying half up front through PayPal and the other half upon delivery. That sounded reasonable enough, so I agreed and sent her my contact info, including address and phone number. I even gave Nancy my driver's license number to provide some reassurance I was a legitimate seller. The next morning, I was thrilled to see $1,000 hit my PayPal account from Nancy. We confirmed a delivery date for that Saturday when I bring the clock to her home about an hour away. I was so excited that this family heirloom would finally be going to someone who seemed to genuinely appreciate it. That clock originally belonged to my grandparents, who I was very close with as a child. They used to let me gently swing the pendulum and would patiently explain how the intricate gears worked to keep accurate time. Some of my best memories were sitting in their cozy living room listening contentedly to the steady, soothing ticking. The gentle chime on the hour always made me feel safe and at peace. When my grandparents eventually passed away, the clock was left to me in their will. It sat proudly in my own living room for years, filling me with warmth and nostalgia. But after going through a difficult divorce, I had to downsize to a small apartment and no longer had room for such a substantial piece. I knew my grandparents would wanted their beloved clock to bring joy to a new owner rather than collecting dust and storage. On Saturday morning, I carefully wrapped the clock in moving blankets and loaded it into my SUV. I set off for the address Nancy had provided about an hour's drive away. It was a small, older home that had clearly seen better days. The lawn was badly overgrown with weeds, and the windows were all covered with blankets and sheets instead of curtains. My positive excitement started to wane, but I told myself not to be so quick to judge. I walked up and knocked loudly, then rang the bell several times, but there was no answer. I checked Nancy's messages on my phone to confirm I had the right place. After nearly 15 minutes of waiting, I tried calling her cell number, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. My stomach sank as I realized I may have been scammed. In desperation, I banged on the front door yelling hello, but the house remained still and silent. Peering through a slit in one of the window blankets, I could see the room was completely empty save for some trash and cobwebs. Panicked thoughts raced through my mind. Who was this Nancy who called herself Stuff 2002? Why wasn't she here? How could I have been so foolish? I felt like the world's biggest idiot. Dejected, I carefully loaded the clock back into my SUV. The whole somber drive home I replayed the situation over and over, filled with anger at Nancy and profound disappointment in myself. Once home, I saw the Facebook profile for Stuff 2002 had been deactivated. The phone number was disconnected too. Over the next several days, I went through every avenue trying in vain to get my money back or identify the scammer. I filed claims and reports with PayPal, the police, the FBI, Internet Crimes Division, even hired a private investigator. But deep down I knew it was likely a dead end, that the clock was gone for good. Losing that beloved clock completely devastated me. It was one of the last tangible connections I had to my cherished grandparents and childhood memories. The idea that it was likely destroyed or abandoned somewhere broke my heart. I was also angry and ashamed at myself for blindly trusting a total stranger and not protecting such a precious family heirloom when I had the chance. In the end, all I could do was turn it into an expensive life lesson. Now, in selling anything of value online, I am much more cautious and prudent. I do thorough background checks on potential buyers, only accept cash payments, and meet in very public places. I'll probably never see that cherished antique clock again, but at least my painful mistake has made me wiser. I just hope no one else suffers at the hands of the mysterious scammer Nancy, or Stuff 2002, or whatever fake name she uses next. I'll never forget the day I bought that old wardrobe. I had just moved into my new apartment in the city and was looking to furnish the place on a tight budget. A friend had told me about this hole-in-the-wall antique shop downtown that sometimes had unique pieces for cheap. I decided to check it out on my day off, hoping to score some vintage charm for my bare old apartment. The shop was cramped and cluttered, squeezed into the ground floor of an old brownstone building. It was dimly lit with furniture and knickknacks crammed into every nook. A little bell jingled above the door when I entered. I browsed through the disorganized aisles, sneezing occasionally from all the dust. The place had that distinct old shop smell, a combination of mustiness, mothballs, and aged wood. Towards the back corner, an ornate wardrobe caught my eye. It was enormous, nearly reaching the ceiling, made from dark carved wood with intricate details. The kind of antique you'd expect to find living in a Gothic mansion or creepy old castle. I inspected the price tag dangling from the ornate handle, $200. A little steep for my budget, but it seemed like a good deal for such a substantial solid wood piece. I pictured it in my small bedroom, adding a touch of shadowy ambience. Without hesitating, I flagged down the shop owner and told him I'd take it. The elderly owner raised his bushy eyebrows in surprise, as if no one had ever wanted to purchase the ominous wardrobe before. He muttered under his breath as we worked to haul the incredibly heavy piece out the door and load it into the back of my small SUV. I wasn't sure if my shocks would survive the trip home under that weight, but I managed to carefully drive it to my apartment without incident. Lugging that behemoth up 3 flights of stairs by myself was a true feat of strength. The wardrobe was so heavy and unwieldy, I was panting and my arms were jello by the time I maneuvered it into my bedroom. I wiped my sweaty brow and stepped back to admire it in the space. Despite the aching muscles, I felt satisfied seeing the antique nestled against the wall, its ornate front facing out. The piece gave my modest room a touch of gloomy Victorian charm. When I opened the creaky doors to look inside, a musty odor wafted out. The interior smelled of old wood, mothballs, and a faint but odd metallic scent I couldn't quite place. Figuring it was just the standard smell of antique furniture, I closed it back up. As I organized the rest of my new apartment over the next week, I kept catching whiffs of that strange odor. It seemed to be emanating from the wardrobe itself. The smell clung to my clothes and bedding, even though I never used a wardrobe to store anything yet. About 2 weeks after purchasing the wardrobe, I was putting away some clothing and other items I had picked up at the thrift store. As I arranged things on the empty shelves, I noticed something bunched up in the far back corner. Reaching in, my fingers brushed against cloth. I grasped the mystery object and pulled it out to get a better look. It was a small apron stained and discolored with age. The fabric was so worn in places it was almost sheer. I unfolded it, and my breath caught in my throat. The entire front panel was covered in dark reddish-brown stains, unmistakably dried blood, and a lot of it. My hands shook slightly, clutching the apron as I took in the extent of the stains. Splashes, smears, and handprints covered every inch, as if someone had been drenched in blood while wearing it. I gagged reflexively at the gruesome sight and the implications behind it. There was no innocent reason an apron could get that saturated in blood. The metallic scent from the wardrobe suddenly made awful sense. Whoever's blood was on this apron, they must have been gravely injured, or worse. Frantically, I shoved the apron back into the darkest corner of the wardrobe and slammed the door shut, trying to erase the image from my mind. But it was seared there now. All I could picture were those rust-colored handprints and bloody smears. Just knowing it was hidden in the furniture I had brought into my home made me shudder. In the following days, I avoided going anywhere near the wardrobe looming ominously in my bedroom. I even relocated to the living room at night, preferring the lumpy food into spending another night in the same room as that grisly relic. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to figure out where it came from, whose blood was spattered all over it, and why the previous owner had kept it secretively stashed away rather than destroying it. Finally, working up the nerve, I cautiously opened the wardrobe back up. The apron lay there in the shadows, looking just as gruesome as the first time I laid eyes on it. I steeled myself as I reached in to pick it up, scrutinizing every fiber for clues. But I found nothing to identify the origin. No initials, no labels, not a single hint pointing to whose blood had soaked into the fabric. At this point, I knew the wardrobe had to go. As nice as it looked, I couldn't stand having it in my apartment for another night, not with such a disturbing secret concealed inside. I wrestled the bulky antique back down the narrow stairwells and loaded it into my car. As I drove to the dump, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those bloody handprints reappear on the polished wood. But the wardrobe remained stoically silent. I watched it sink into the trash heap with a sense of grim relief, happy to never lay eyes on the thing again. Part of me was tempted to return to the antique shop and demand answers from the owner who sold me the wardrobe. But another part of me feared learning the truth about where it came from and how that apron ended up cached away inside. In the end, I decided some mysteries are better left unsolved. The story died with the wardrobe at the landfill. But the memory of that blood-soaked apron still makes me shudder even now. A chilling memento of the darkness that can lurk unseen, even in the most ordinary pieces of furniture. I can't believe I fell for it again. I should have known better than to trust that sketchy seller on the popular online marketplace site, but their listing seemed so enticing and legitimate. The pictures showed high-quality designer items, handbags, clothes, jewelry, electronics, home goods, all advertised at unbelievable rock-bottom prices. At first, I thought maybe they were used items or last season's leftovers being cleared out cheap, but the detailed descriptions claimed everything was brand new, just being sold so low because the seller got overstock deals directly from manufacturers. I let the bargain hunter in me get hooked in and took the bait, even though it seemed too good to be true. I started small, ordering a $500 designer handbag for only $50 to test it out. The photo showed smooth, fine Italian leather, elegant hardware, intricate stitching. It looked amazing. But when the package arrived, it was clearly a cheap knockoff. The material was rigid plasticky pleather, the hardware was rough, unfinished metal, the stitching was sloppy and uneven. Nothing like the beautiful high-end product in the listing. I felt so stupid for falling for what was obviously a scam. I tried to get my money back, but the seller refused, claiming they described it accurately. I should have learned my lesson right then, but this seller was a master at luring me back in. A week later, they posted an unbelievable deal on a bundle of popular electronics, 5 brand new iPhones, iPads, smartwatches, wireless earbuds, all the latest models shown in sleek packaging for the price of one item. I knew it seemed way too good to be true, but I let FOMO and curiosity get to me. I somehow convinced myself maybe the handbag was just a one-off mistake. But of course, when the delivery came, it was nothing but scratched up, broken, obsolete electronics that looked like they were fished out of the garbage. The seller insisted this is what was described in the listing to justify their refusal to refund me. Got me again. After that, I stayed away from that dishonest seller's storefront, or at least tried to. But their listings were so tantalizing and seemed so real. A whole luxury living room set, couch, chairs, tables, cabinets, bed frame, all top designer brands like Restoration Hardware shown styled beautifully in a richly decorated photo shoot for an impossibly low price. Even though I knew better after being burned twice already, I somehow let myself get tempted again, rationalizing that maybe furniture would be harder to fake. But when the delivery came, it was the same story. Cheap particle board junk you get from a discount store, not the premium quality advertised. Another scam. It didn't stop there either. Against all common sense, I kept ordering from this fraudster whenever they'd post something irresistible. A commercial-grade juicer for a tiny fraction of retail price, a digital SLR camera bundle with extra lenses for pennies on the dollar, a set of ceramic cookware from a famous maker supposedly marked way down. Every time the reality would arrive as a disappointment, showing they lied. It was never what was pictured and described. Just more garbage quality fakes and knockoffs being passed off deceptively. I don't know why I kept falling for it over and over. Maybe deep down I wanted to believe there really could be an honest seller offering unbelievable deals online. Or maybe the lure of scoring expensive things so cheaply made me abandon good judgment. Either way, I kept getting duped, even as the evidence piled up that this seller was a complete sham. My coworker Jenny tried to warn me after I excitedly showed her the listing for a professional stand mixer for 90% off retail. There's no way that can be real, she cautioned, but I insisted the seller had good reviews and seemed legit. Of course, when it arrived, it was a dinky lightweight toy that burned out after 30 seconds of use. Even my mom pleaded with me to stop after I called to tell her about the amazing deal I'd found at a brand new big screen TV. Honey, if it seems too good to be true, it always is, she said wisely. But I was convinced this time would be different. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Just another worthless, broken disappointment. Eventually, after being scammed so many times, I had no choice but to admit this seller was a complete sham artist who would never actually deliver an honest bargain. As much as I wanted to believe otherwise and continue chasing their deals, the reality was that everything they listed was a total bait and switch ruse designed to prey on wishful thinkers like me. No matter how legit the listing, I had to accept it would always be a scam in the end. My family warned me from the beginning that the seller seemed sketchy and untrustworthy, but I still kept getting reeled in by my own gullibility and their manipulative tactics. They knew just how to exploit my bargain hunting mentality and trick me into imagining an unrealistic deal could be real. Hindsight is 20/20, but all the signs were there that this was too good to be true. In the end, I paid the price for ignoring logic and letting my own stupidity and their deceptions repeatedly dupe me. Eventually, I wised up and realized I had to be smarter and more cautious about spotting shady sellers and listings. The temptation of scoring an unbelievable bargain can make it easy to see what you want to see instead of what's really there. But getting scammed so many times taught me an expensive lesson. If an offer seems too good to be true, it always is. No more falling for those fantasies perpetrated by dishonest fraudsters. From now on, I'll be sticking to reputable sellers and reasonable prices, even if it means passing on something enticingly marked down. Protecting myself is worth far more than any imaginary deal, no matter how appealing the lies and false promises used to hook me in. My days of being a sucker are over. It was a busy Saturday morning at the local weekend marketplace. The familiar sounds of vendors hawking their wares and customers haggling over prices filling the warm spring air. As I slowly meandered through the crowded aisles, scanning the various stalls bursting with fresh produce, handmade crafts, and more, one particular item caught my eye. A vintage muscle car parked at the far edge of the market. The cherry red paint gleamed without a single scratch or blemish, flawless and smooth. The chrome accents sparkled brightly like diamonds, not a hint of rust or tarnish. I quickened my pace, weaving between shoppers, eager to get a closer look. As I approached, the middle-aged owner stepped forward from where he had been leaning casually against the vehicle. He had a broad smile on his face and a confident swagger about him. He began enthusiastically detailing the car's impressive features: a powerful V8 engine that had been fully rebuilt and modified, a racing-tuned suspension kit, and a completely refurbished leather interior. According to him, it was a rare, highly coveted 1969 Chevy Camaro Z28 in pristine mint condition. He claimed he had owned it for years but was finally ready to let it go to a good home. I nodded along attentively as he spoke, captivated by the vehicle's flawless beauty and the owner's charming presentation. The passion in his voice sounded completely genuine. After asking my own questions to learn more about the maintenance history and specifications, I asked if I could take it for a test drive. The owner grinned and tossed me the keys. Sliding into the driver's seat was like slipping into a dream. The black leather hugged me perfectly, and the unblemished wood-grain dash gleamed. Turning the key in the ignition, the engine roared to life with a rumbling purr that gave me goosebumps. I took it around the block, feeling the throaty power as I shifted gears. It handled like I was riding on air. By the time I eased back into the market parking lot, I was absolutely giddy with excitement to finally own my dream car. After negotiating a price that seemed almost too good to be true, I counted out the bills and handed over the cash payment. The owner smiled warmly, shook my hand, and congratulated me on my new purchase. He pocketed the money and stepped aside, allowing me to claim my long-desired prize. This was really happening. I slowly sunk into the plush driver's seat, key already in the ignition. I was filled with sheer joy, ready for the sunny drive home in my gorgeous new cruiser. But just as I went to start the engine, the owner suddenly reached through the open window and snatched the cash right out of my hands. Before I could react, he sprinted around and jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door. Heart pounding, I stared in stunned disbelief as he hit the gas, peeling out of the market parking lot at top speed. My shock quickly turned to anger and panic as he wove recklessly through the crowd. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands to call the police. Tires squealing, he just barely missed clipping vendors and shoppers who dove out of the way, yelling angrily. We careened around sharp corners, the tires protesting as smoke rose up. My whole body tensed, braced for a crash as he drove like a madman. In the distance, I could hear sirens growing closer. The police were in hot pursuit now, but struggling to keep up with the car's powerful, modified engine. The thief drove less cautiously, racing through stop signs and weaving between lanes. After a few horrific near misses at intersections, a police cruiser finally managed to pull up alongside the speeding sports car. In a daring maneuver, the officer nudged the rear fender, sending the car into a screeching spin. The thief frantically spun the wheel trying to correct, but it was too late. We went crashing into a row of empty market stalls, the sand splintering on impact as plumes of dust and debris rose into the air. My body jolted violently against the seatbelt from the impact, and my ears were ringing. Dazed, I looked over to see the crook already scrambling from the wreckage. Police were waiting as he tried to run. Realizing there was no escape, he slowly raised his hands in resignation. In handcuffs, the con man was led away to the squad car while I gave the police my statement. Numb with shock, I could only stare wordlessly at the now heavily damaged sports car I had been so eager to have just minutes earlier. The officers took down all the details and promised to pursue full charges against the thief. As I slowly walked back through the market, the earlier exhilaration I had felt was replaced by a sick, lingering feeling in the pit of my stomach. My eyes were now open to the potential dangers that existed beneath the bustling marketplace's cheerful veneer. I felt so silly for having trusted the friendly salesman and his compelling story. Passing electronics and luxury goods booths with prices that seemed impossibly low, my skepticism was now raised. The merchandise appeared flawless, shiny, and new under the bright booth lights. Smiling salespeople assured me the items were legitimate, backed by guarantees. But having just been scammed mere minutes ago, I was wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. I now noticed suspicious flaws I would have missed before. A poorly photocopied warranty card, a brand name just slightly misspelled. As much as I was tempted by the deals, I politely thanked the vendors but walked away empty-handed, my trust shattered. Just days later, the news spread that many of those same sellers had disappeared from the market after customers complained of being knowingly sold fake, defective goods. My caution had protected me, but I felt frustrated that others had still fallen victim. From then on, I have always carefully researched sellers, thoroughly inspected merchandise, and listened to my instincts before making any marketplace purchases. I wish con artists didn't see the bustling commerce of the weekend market as a ripe opportunity for elaborate scams. But the hard truth is that among the many wonderful vendors, some criminally minded ones will likely always lurk in the shadows. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.